The learning objectives for the session one or week one is that we as a group understand the difference between a yoga, a yogi, a yoga teacher, a yoga therapist, and an Ayurveda yoga therapist. We have to understand that the yoga teacher is our 200-hour or 300-hour or 500-hour standards defined by Yoga Alliance. Yoga therapists are 1,000 hours or almost a medical yoga defined by an organization called International Association of Yoga Therapists, IAYT. And Ayurveda yoga therapy is very, very new. In fact, only last year, NAMA, National Ayurvedic Medical Association, came out with these definition of what an Ayurveda yoga therapist is. And they defined an Ayurveda yoga therapist is already an Ayurveda counselor, having 600 hours of training and another 400 hours of yoga therapy training. And of course, you cannot be a yoga therapy without a yoga teacher. So the scope, the education, and the application of all of these are absolutely different. I am not going to get into what yoga is right now. Our focus right now for this particular session is to understand yoga teacher, yoga. Here we are. This is what I wanted to talk about in today's session. So here we go. So if you've ever attended a yoga class, you've gone into a gym and you've attended a yoga class, you've probably been taught by someone who's a yoga teacher. A yoga teacher can have 200 hours, which is a basic yoga training. Anybody can walk in and get that training. And it's not very comprehensive. It basically teaches you to design a basic yoga class, a basic hatha yoga or whatever Iyengar yoga class. I take that back. Iyengar yoga is actually going to be a lot longer than 200 hours because it's very close to yoga therapy. And a yoga teacher could have 500 hours or 300 hours or more than that as well. So the standards, such people are either called ERYT or ERYT or ERYT 500. These are so RYT is registered yoga teacher, which is 200 hours. ERYT is experienced registered yoga teacher who has more than 200 hours of training. For example, I'm an ERYT. And then you have ERYT 500 who has 500 or more hours of yoga training. And then you have a yoga therapist. Yoga therapist is not defined by Yoga Alliance. Yoga Alliance has nothing to do with yoga therapy. Yoga therapy is a yoga therapist who is already a yoga teacher. So chances of a yoga therapist being a yoga teacher or experienced yoga teacher or just a yoga teacher are very, very high. The guidelines are, as you know what yoga therapy is, they have a lot more medical training, anatomy training, physiology training, and whatnot. And they're doing a very specific work. For example, they might be teaching yoga to people who have had a mastectomy, breast cancer survivors, or I remember having a friend in San Diego, and she was working with soldiers with PTSD, and she was doing mind body, and the mind body included yoga therapy in it as well. So it was very specific to returning soldiers with PTSD, and there was a certain demographic, and it was part of a study. So it was more a yoga therapy, and of course, um, it's a completely different route, and they try to measure it as well. And then you have the Ayurveda counselor. So what is it that you need to be if you want to be an Ayurveda yoga therapist? You already need to be a 600-hour Ayurveda counselor and a yoga teacher. And then you can either have a training in an organization or a school or grandfathered because of your experience. That's your Ayurveda yoga therapist. Or you could be a physical or occupational therapist, physician, sports person, personal trainer, and happen to also be a yoga teacher, and that person usually ends up going in the yoga therapist as well. And let's go to the next slide. I have a little. These are some examples of yoga therapy. So yoga therapists are using yoga for a very specific purpose for healing. So they're using yoga as a tool to help person move. So in a yoga class, when you walk in, people are very bendy, and they can, they're almost hypermobile. They can do a lot of asanas. Yoga therapy is not meant for a person who's hypermobile. Here's a person who has plantar fasciitis or diabetic neuropathy, or maybe they've even lost a limb or PTSD, and they cannot move. They have a loss of mobility, and so you basically helping a person to move in that direction. A prenatal yoga class, a, a prenatal yoga class, if you could walk into a group, anybody can come in. But you're talking about, let's say, a prenatal yoga class for women above 40 who have high risk pregnancy, where the yoga class is being done by a yoga teacher who also happens to be a nurse, or a prenatal nurse, or a midwife, or a doula. So that would be, and they're very much for, or prenatal yoga class for women in the last trimester. You have postnatal yoga class, for women who have had, who have 6 weeks after they, maybe they've had some surgery, or they've had some issues. So now their body's getting back into shape. So this is not just a regular post, it's a very specific one. Then, of course, restorative yoga focusing on post chemotherapy for specific demographics again. Yoga for veterans who have lost a limb, or PTSD, yoga post breast cancer, yoga focusing on MS or neurological disorders. I have a friend who actually has a yoga therapy studio in Wisconsin, who actually does yoga for MS or neurological disorders, being a physician himself. Restorative yoga for elderly with osteoporosis, or people with diabetes or neuropathy, and so on. The idea is you have to help them move. So yoga therapists may work with a physical therapist, or an occupational therapist for kids. And the idea is that people have some kind of might have a musculoskeletal issue, or they have trouble moving, or they're recovering from surgery and whatnot. So you have to have more than 200 hours. You can't just be a yoga teacher. So you have to have knowledge of anatomy, physiology, bodily planes, and basically this knowledge of movement is called kinesiology, and definitely the musculoskeletal system. And this is something, when we do a live class, we will be talking about this. Well, hope you understood the difference between yoga and yoga therapy and enjoyed this little talk.